From Waynesburg to Altoona, Williamsport to York, this is Lincoln Radio Journal. On this edition, have we gone from gerrymandering to judicial mandering? The Pennsylvania Supreme Court now says it will draw new congressional district lines. Chris Nicholas of Eagle Consulting is here with the latest developments. Riding horses provides amazing therapeutic value for children with mental health needs. Joe Geiger from the First Nonprofit Foundation has Cameron Patchett of Quest Therapeutic Services in the Community Benefit Spotlight. And helping veterans receive the medical care they deserve is the goal of Concerned Veterans for America. Ellen McCormack of Concerned Veterans for America has this week's Lincoln Radio Journal commentary. I'm Loman Henry, and welcome to Lincoln Radio Journal. We'll get to Chris Nicholas in just a couple of minutes, but first, news headlines from PATownhall.com. There is a bit of good news for the Pittsburgh International Airport. Just under 9 million passengers utilized the airport in 2017. That is an 8% increase over 2016. According to the Allegheny Institute in Pittsburgh, that is the largest year-over-year gain at the airport since the turn of the century. Helping to drive the increase is the fact more flights have been added to additional destinations, but Pittsburgh's increased passenger flow is not unique among the nation's mid-sized airports. In that category, Pittsburgh International ranked fourth. Taxpayer subsidies, though, have played a large role in underwriting costs of using the airport and have helped fuel the growth in passenger usage. The Pennsylvania chapter of the National Federation of Independent Business this past week expressed what it termed grave concern over the failure of the State House of Representatives to pass a bill that would have created a drug formulary within the Pennsylvania workers' compensation system. That measure would have set guidelines for treatments and prescriptions based on widely accepted medical standards. If passed into law, the measure would address painkiller overprescribing, fraud in the system, and would have helped to control costs. Kevin Shivers of NFIB faulted the lawmakers who voted against the provision for failing to take what would have been a key step in combating opioid abuse and addiction. The Republican Party of Pennsylvania this past weekend voted to endorse Congressman Lou Barletta for the United States Senate, along with York County State Senator Scott Wagner for governor and Montgomery County businessman Jeff Bartos for lieutenant governor. If nominated in the May primary, Barletta would face incumbent U.S. Senator Robert P. Casey Jr. in November. Wagner and Bartos would face incumbent Governor Tom Wolf. However, Wagner and Bartos face primary opposition from retired Pittsburgh businessman Paul Mango, who earlier this week named Washington County Commissioner Diana Irie Vaughn as his running mate. The primary election will be held in May. Read about these stories and more at the all-new PATownhall.com. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court has ruled the congressional district lines in effect since 2012 are unconstitutional. The legislature offered a new plan which has been rejected by the governor, so the court plans to impose its own congressional district map. Here to talk about this unprecedented situation is veteran political consultant Chris Nicholas of Eagle Consulting. Chris, welcome back to Lincoln Radio Journal. Chris, as we look at the situation with these congressional district lines, we find ourselves in uncharted territory, an unprecedented situation. Can you, for those who may not have followed it all that closely, explain what has happened and how we've gotten to the point we are at the moment?
For normal people with regular lives, yes, they're probably not keeping up on those, Loman, but right now all 12.7 million Pennsylvanians can't say what congressional district they live in. The congressional redistricting map that was passed in 2011, which we used without incident in elections in 2012, 14, and 16, has now been thrown out and said is unconstitutional by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So now, kind of under the gun with elections about to start, they've said you need to draw a new map. So we have a lot of people in limbo, not just people, but also candidates. If you're a candidate out there and you don't know what district you're in, how do you campaign? What about all the money you may have spent to date advertising to people that may not now, when they redraw the maps, be in your district? So normally you redraw maps once a decade in the year ending with 1. So now we're thrust into this unprecedented position of having to do them again in an even year. In fact, this week, petition season started. Everybody who gets on the ballot in Pennsylvania, from precinct committee to president, has to get a certain number of signatures from members of their party to get on the ballot. And because of all this uncertainty, they've rescheduled the petition circulating time, but only for congressional candidates. So right now you have people out there running for governor, U.S. Senator, State House, State Senate. They're getting their signatures, but the congressional folks are standing on the sidelines because, like I said, no one can say, do I live in District 11? Do I live in District 17? Do I live in District 6 or District 7? So there's lots of uncertainty out there that's like the animals have taken over the circus.
We've both referred to the fact that this is unprecedented. Normally, and this is obviously not normal, when there are challenges that go up the ladder of the courts, and it is not uncommon for redistricting plans to end up before the Supreme Court of the state. But doesn't that usually happen, as you pointed out, in the year ending with 1? Wasn't 2011 the time when these challenges normally would happen? Now we've actually elected congressmen and congresswomen 3 cycles. Why now? What changed that made this all of a sudden 8 years into the process, 7 years into the process, unconstitutional?
I think for Democrats, 2 things happened. One, Donald Trump happened. So as part of their quote-unquote resistance to him, it's been activism against what they see as gerrymandered maps. And since 2011, the Democrats have taken a majority on the state Supreme Court. So they now see that as a reliable backstop to them. In criminal matters, and obviously this isn't a criminal matter, you've heard people talk about how long can you be liable for something. After a certain time, you can't be prosecuted. Well, I would say this about the maps. In 2011, we had a vote in the House and Senate. Many Democrats voted for this map. Then Governor Corbett signed it, and off we went. So this is getting into banana republic territory where 2/3 of the way through the 10-year cycle, you say, oh no, we have to redo these districts. And there are some states in the South that are under special federal rules in terms of the racial makeup, but Pennsylvania is not part of that. So it's really just now political. Republicans like myself say that Democrats have weaponized their congressional campaign ineptitude because they look at the map and say, we should win more districts. And I say, well, there's a couple districts that have more registered Republicans than Democrats, and you can't even field good candidates there, let alone win races. And the Democrats say, no, look at the share of the vote we have statewide. We should have more members of Congress. And I say, run better campaigns, raise more money. So people look at the 7th congressional district, which does have somewhat of a contorted shape, and they say, see, if the lines were better, we'd win this. And I say, well, Democrats for governor and president have won that district. Why can't you Democrats win it on the congressional level? So I think there are some folks that see the lines not as a means to an end, but the end themselves. So we're, like you said, in uncharted territory. The state Supreme Court has said if the governor and legislature can't figure out a map, they're going to draw one themselves. That power is not invested in them. They've just kind of said, oh, yes, we can do it. So now we're having kind of takeover by judicial fiat. So the timeline is ticking. The primary is still May 15th. We have campaigns that are still in limbo. It's hard to campaign because you don't know what towns you have. It gets harder to raise money because people are like, well, do I live in your district? And you can't honestly give them an answer. You can say, well, I think so. But, donors want a little bit more reassurance than I think so, Lohman.
They do. And, as we look at the situation here, Chris, over the past week, the legislative leadership has pro-offered a new map. The governor has said he still finds that map to be unacceptable.
Well, that's interesting, Lohman. Let's think about this for a minute. This is the proposed legislative map, and an analyst for the AFL-CIO, the statewide labor union, looked at it and said, of the 18 congressional districts, this newer map, the proposed map from the legislature, 9 districts would get more Republican, 9 districts would get more Democrat. Okay, that seems on the face okay. Now, obviously, there are 4 or 5 Republican districts that are safe no matter what. There's 4 Democratic districts that are safe no matter what, clustered on their side around the big cities, clustered on the Republican side out in the hinterlands. So you're only talking about 8 or 9 seats that are competitive, and then you break that down, half get more Republican, half get more Democrat. On the face of it, that would seem to meet the judicial standards, but we're in this netherworld where you've got elected people and judicial folks who, while elected, are somewhat shielded from politics going back and forth. What I've long said is a political map drawn by politicians for political reasons is
Political. Well, and here we have a Supreme Court that is acting in a political manner as well. And the court has said if the governor and the legislature cannot agree, which they have thus far, at least as of this recording, have not, they're going to draw their own map. So we're assuming at some point within the next few days, the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania is going to, by fiat, put in place a new congressional district map. Who knows what it will look like? We'll know when we see it.
Drawn by a college professor they hired from California.
Well, that's
who has a history of donating to Democratic candidates, which is fine. You're allowed to donate to whomever you want. But when the Democratic majority on the Supreme Court hires a professor from California, read into that what you want, who has been a donor to Democratic campaigns, well, you can kind of see the writing on the wall there, Lumen.
We can see what the writing on the wall is. So, Chris, at this point, since the Constitution of the United States, and I believe also the Constitution of Pennsylvania, require that the legislature draws the district lines, at nowhere in any of the governing documents, the U.S. or state constitutions, does it give even remotely the power to the Supreme Court. Is this now going to create the possibility that federal courts, the U.S. Supreme Court, might finally get involved in this dispute?
Loman, I am not an attorney. I don't play one on TV. I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. But I will note to people that before the state Supreme Court decision threw out our maps, our congressional map had been looked at by 2 different courts. One, the Commonwealth Court in Pennsylvania, which is a statewide court which does the election law here. That review said it was okay. It was also sued in federal courts. So a court of appeals in the Third Circuit, which includes Pennsylvania, a 3-judge panel voted 2-1 that our districts were okay. So those 2 other levels it was voted okay. So if it gets thrown back into the federal level, I can't tell you, but it would seem to be a constitutional question if all of a sudden a state Supreme Court is going to say, no, we're going to draw the maps.
Not only a constitutional question on the maps themselves, but Chris, does this not trigger a major constitutional crisis in Pennsylvania? Because now you have the judicial branch usurping power that is specifically reserved to the legislative branch. To me, this is going to trigger a battle of historic proportions between these 2 branches of government.
They are separate but equal, and I don't know how that would turn out, Loman, but I would not want to be the state court system in about a month going before the legislature to ask for their appropriations for the next fiscal year from the state, because I'm sure there'd be a lot of legislators who would be like, buy your own pens and chairs and judicial offices.
Well, the legislature has the power of the purse. Of course, the legislature has the power to redraw maps, and the courts took it, so they might try to take that power as well.
The last thing I would say, Loman, is, again, we don't draw maps to draw maps. We draw maps so we can have free and fair elections. Okay? So that's what I think we need to get onto now, because time's a wasting. And if you're trying to beat an incumbent, all this revving and neutral that we're doing, you don't know where the lines are, you can't raise money, all that's doing is ultimately helping incumbents.
Well, we are going to continue to keep a very close eye on this. It's going to be rapidly developing over the next couple of days and weeks, so we'll keep you informed. Right now, we have been talking with Chris Nicholas, a veteran political consultant. He runs Eagle Consulting. Chris, if we have listeners who would like to get your Twitter feed on this, perhaps view your website, how can they do that?
Website is eagleconsult.com. I'm very active on the Twitter, as we call it. Eagle63 at Eagle63 is my Twitter handle. Join the conversation.
Thank you. Chris Nicholas of Eagle Consulting. Quest Therapeutic Services operates a pilot program that treats children and adolescents through equine-assisted therapy. Joe Geiger from the First Nonprofit Foundation gets details from Cameron Patchett of Quest Therapeutic Services. Joe?
Thank you, Loman, and thank you, Cameron, for being a guest on the Lincoln Radio program.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Cameron, would you share with the listeners a little bit about the Quest Therapeutic Services, Inc. program? Give them some background.
Quest was founded by physical therapist Sandy McCluskey in 1996 with 6 children. Since then, Quest has evolved into a full-time 501c3 not-for-profit program serving over 100 children per week. So in 2005, we opened up our state-of-the-art facility in Westchester, Pennsylvania. We have 2 indoor therapy rooms. We have a large heated indoor arena with dust-free footing. We have our outdoor playground and sensory area where we utilize our natural environment. And what we do is we provide therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy to children with a variety of diagnoses and disabilities. Some of those include cerebral palsy, autism, Down syndrome, low muscle tone, speech delays, attention deficit disorders, and general developmental delays.
What are some of the ways that you translate those therapies through horses?
Technical term, hippotherapy, refers to how physical therapists, occupational therapists, and speech therapists use evidence-based practice in using the movement of the horse to engage the child's sensory, neuromotor, and cognitive systems to help us key in on functional goals. So when a child is positioned on a horse, certain multi-dimensional movement patterns are reinforced over and over again throughout our sessions. So this really helps us to enforce those motor learning or sensory integration goals that we're working on. So the key is that repetitive, consistent movement simulates the natural gait pattern of humans when they're walking, and none of that can be duplicated by any other type of therapy equipment out there.
And it's not just movement therapy, but the therapy of the movement helps young people, all persons with all kinds of challenges. Like I've observed over the years how equine therapy helps people with autism, for example.
Yep, so the key to why the use of the horse's movement is so effective, it's just that it's consistent rhythmic movement, and it's repeated hundreds of times. With each step the horse takes, those movement patterns are just being consistently reinforced, which helps us make those gains so much quicker.
This is Joe Geiger on the Lincoln Radio program. My guest today is Cameron Patchett, the therapy manager for Quest Therapeutic Services, Inc. out of Westchester, Pennsylvania. Cameron, it must be expensive to run a program like this, to maintain horses and property and equipment and that kind of thing. How are you funded?
We are funded through insurance reimbursements as well as corporate, individual, and foundation giving. So each year we fundraise approximately $285,000 in order to serve as many children as possible.
On average, what does it cost per horse to maintain a horse throughout the year?
That is an ongoing conundrum that we face, actually. It's not only just the cost of the feed and the farm, it's also, there's vet and farrier and ongoing training. Our horses go through rigorous training programs throughout their time as well. So all of that gets factored in.
Where do you find your horses?
We are always on the lookout for horses. We are actually doing a multi-state search. We pick our horses based on the size, based on the movement that they impart, obviously based on their temperament, their tolerance. So we try to have as much of a variety as we can so that we can really provide what we need for as many kids with different needs as we possibly can.
Your counselors, different kinds of counselors go through different kinds of certification programs, but in the absence of a certification for a horse, they go through a battery of tests. Share a little bit about what you're looking for in a therapy horse.
Absolutely. So our horses are the heroes of our program. They're so tolerant with everything that we put them through. So when we're looking at horses, we're looking at different sizes, whether it be the height of the horse, the width of the horse, as well as the movement pattern that they that they pass on to the child when they're sitting on their back. So we need to make sure that the horses physically fits the characteristics that we're looking for, but also mentally. So our horses need to be tolerant of the different activities that the children participate in, but also engaged in the session so that we can really make sure that we get those goals that we're trying to achieve.
How many volunteers do you have? Where do you find them, and what kinds of things can they do for you?
We do rely very heavily on volunteers as well. Our horses are handled and led during our session by trained volunteers. We have volunteers that help with the actual therapy during the session. They help with different activities with the children. We have some volunteers that come in and just help with the barn aspect of our program and the horses. So we do rely very, very heavily on our volunteers. We've got a great team of volunteers right now. There's over 100 volunteers that come through a week. And as I said, we train them with what we can and what we need help with, and they've just been wonderful with being consistent and really helping us maintain our program to provide the best services that we can. We reach out to the community. We have Westchester University nearby. I know that we have some students that do come and volunteer, but also just community members.
I imagine that everybody who volunteers and works in this field has their own personal reasons of how it's satisfying to them. But I'd like you to spend a moment with us reflecting on, at the end of a long week when you're tired and might not have been a great week for progress with a particular client or that kind of thing, just share a story of how you know you're making a difference. How does this all make it all worthwhile for you?
I see gains in so many areas with my kiddos that I work with. I've got kiddos that have better social interaction or are able to focus for longer periods of time, which I know helps carry over into their school activities or they're playing with their friends. I see general, even if it's not a purely documented functional gain, my kiddos leave with better strength and endurance so that they can climb in and out of their car seat. They can help with getting dressed or feeding themselves. They can run around and play on the playground with their classmates and their friends or their siblings at home. So all of those gains are what keep me engaged in my job here and keep it so that I look forward to coming to work every day, because the effort that these kiddos put in and the changes that we see with working with them in this setting and integrating the movement of the horse is just like another I have seen in any other setting that I've worked in as a physical therapist.
Cameron, if somebody listening to the program would like more information about the Quest Therapeutic Services Inc. program, where can they find you?
Yep, they can go right to our website. It's questtherapeutic.com. So QUESTTherapeutic.com.
This is Joe Geiger on the Lincoln Radio program. My guest today is Cameron Patchett, the therapy manager for the Quest Therapeutic Services, Inc. program. Cameron, thank you for being a guest on the program.
Absolutely, Joe. Thanks so much for having me.
Back to you, Loman.
Concerned Veterans for America is working on a wide range of issues of importance to our nation's veterans. Alan McCormack is the new Pennsylvania State Director of Concerned Veterans for America. He joins us now to talk about one of their key issues.
I'm Alan McCormack, a retired Army captain and Desert Storm veteran. I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself as the new Pennsylvania Coalitions Director for Concerned Veterans for America. Concerned Veterans for America is a veterans and military families organization dedicated to preserving the freedom and prosperity that we sacrificed to defend. I served 24 years in the Army Reserves, first as an enlisted soldier and later as a commissioned officer. And I took an oath to support and defend our nation's Constitution. That commitment didn't end when I hung up my uniform. That's why I'm proud to be a part of Concerned Veterans for America. Our organization has been on the front lines in the fight to fix the Department of Veterans Affairs. We want all veterans to get the care that they have earned, the care that they need, and the care that they deserve. In his first State of the Union message, President Donald Trump talked about giving veterans more health care choices and health care choices outside of VA medical facilities. We're thankful for the president's leadership on this issue and the important steps his administration and Congress have taken towards reforming the Veterans Administration over the last year. Like the VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act, that made it much easier to fire federal employees who fail in their duty to care for our veterans. The VA has also been more forthcoming recently about its performance and has released data that helps veterans make more informed decisions about their health care. But there's still a long, long way to go. Far too many veterans continue to face delayed and substandard care. But right now, some don't have the ability to go outside of the VA system. Veterans need more health care choices, and Congress is considering common sense proposal that will make that a reality. Senators John McCain and Jerry Moran recently introduced the Veterans Community Care and Access Act of 2017 to streamline the VA's outside care programs and to open the door to bolder reforms that will give veterans more control over their own health care. That's what we need to fix the broken status quo. As you know, Pennsylvania has one of the highest populations of veterans in the nation. And as your coalition's director at Concerned Veterans for America, I promise to bring veterans and others in our community together to generate meaningful dialogue over these important reforms. Learn more about who we are and ways you can join us at vetsforpa.org. That's vets, V-E-T-S, the number 4, and pa.org. I'm Al McCormick. I'm with Concerned Veterans for America. You can visit us on the web at www.cv4a.org. That's C, Charlie, V, Victor, the number 4, alpha.org.
If you miss hearing Lincoln Radio Journal on your favorite radio station, audio of our complete program is available on our websites, lincolnradiojournal.com and lincolninstitute.org. For 23 years, Lincoln Radio Journal has been heard on public affairs-minded radio stations throughout the Commonwealth, including WIOV-AM and WEEU-AM in Reading, along with WIYQ-AM and FM in Saxonburg, Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Leadership Conference this year will be held April 6th and 7th at the Radisson Penn Harris Convention Center in Camp Hill. The Pennsylvania Leadership Conference is the premier conservative event each year here in the Keystone State. This year's featured dinner speaker will be Fox News contributor Byron York. There will be a wide array of speakers, including former U.S. Senator Tom Coburn, along with issue panels and workshops. You can get complete information and register for this year's Pennsylvania Leadership Conference at paleadershipconference.org. The Lincoln Radio Journal is produced weekly by the Lincoln Institute of Public Opinion Research, Incorporated. The Lincoln Institute is completely funded through the generosity of individuals, corporations, and philanthropic foundations, including the Allegheny Foundation of Pittsburgh, the Houston Foundation of Coatesville, the Worrell Foundation of Carlisle, and the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, all of whom have helped to underwrite the costs of this program. Lincoln Radio Journal is a trademark of the Lincoln Institute of Public Opinion Research, Incorporated. Comments and opinions expressed on this program are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Lincoln Institute or of this radio station. From the Lincoln Broadcast Center in Harrisburg, I'm Loman Henry. Thank you for listening to Pennsylvania's most widely broadcast public affairs radio program, Lincoln Radio Journal. Plug into the pulse of Pennsylvania.